Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I am a Disney enthusiast and sewist, some debate on that term at the moment. Anyway, today is December 4th. Oh, hold on. So today is December 4th and I have a large amount of pink fabric and pink dye to make it slightly darker. And I thought it would be a nice challenge and stressful sewing adventure to make Belle's pink dress by December 20th is my deadline. So I have 16 days to make a whole costume. So let's see how that works out. This is my sewing assistant, Emmie. She's very helpful and occasionally she wears cute outfits. But don't worry, she gets well paid for that. So I started off by cutting 5.5 panels for the skirt. I wasn't worrying too much about the bottom hem, as you'll see what I do with that later. And the center one is thinner, so that's why it's 5.5, not 5. Next I boiled a bunch of water for the dye and also tea. I like to call this part Disney soup. Now I know that my dye pot is too small. Don't make my mistake. It made the fabric come out looking wrinkled, but it's just dye stuck in all the cracks. I will eventually get a bigger pot. So I rinsed it and I washed it and I dried it and I spent 2.5 hours ironing it. It still looks like it's wrinkled, but that's just from the dye. So then I sewed the pieces together. And then I serged it. Instead of doing a French seam to enclose all the edges, I just used a serger because I have one. So this dress, I had 2 plackets instead of having one zipper in the back. It's more adjustable. It's a historical technique. Basically, on the 2 sides, I left a section not stitched the whole way. And then here's showing how I hemmed the 2 edges. It forms side openings for the skirt as well, so I can add historical pocket. You know, the kind that aren't attached and are on their own string. I like to add pockets to every costume that I'm able to, because who wants a costume without pockets? Where are you supposed to put your cell phone, or your dog treats, or socks? Here I am pleating the front half of the skirt. I didn't use math, I know how wide it needed to be, and I pleated it to look pretty in between. And I sewed it to a piece of twill tape. This first one is just to keep the pleats in place. And I folded the edge over to enclose all the raw edges in the twill tape. So it's a nice finished edge. Here you can see the plackets, how we tie the back half in the front and the front half in the back, and it just makes an adjustable waistline. This is why I wasn't worried about the bottom of the edge of the skirt earlier. I knew I was going to level it later, so I just cut it. So I put the skirt over a petticoat to make the right shape, and then I leveled it with the floor. For the bottom ruffles, I cut 7 inches, the length of the fabric. And I did a rolled hem where I just folded it over twice and stitched it. The individual pieces of the length of the ruffle were stitched together with a French seam just to hide the raw edges. Not shown is when I used a gathering stitch on the top of the ruffle to gather it down to the length of the skirt. So here I am stitching that together. And then I top stitched the seam allowance just to make it neat. So I finished the skirt last night, so that was a total of 2 days on it. It ended up being a lot more of a circle skirt than the A-line I was intending, but now it's time to draft the bodice and see how that goes, so wish me luck. So the bodice mock-up is now done, And now it is time to rip it all apart and use it as a pattern for the actual bodice. Emmie is very helpful in my studio in preventing productivity. Here I am trying to cut the lining for the bodice. I did change the neckline of the bodice. I don't particularly like off-the-shoulder looks, and it's going to be covered by the cloak anyway, so it really didn't matter. Look, I'm actually using pins! I promise. I'm pinning a 1/2 inch seam allowance for the fashion fabric and the lining here. Princess seams can be tricky, so go slowly when sewing them. Very carefully making sure that the fabric underneath isn't puckering, and so it gets a pretty seam. When I first started sewing, I thought ironing was a waste of time, and I skipped it. But let's just say I have since learned my lesson about ironing and the benefits, that it makes the garment look so much more professional. I sewed down the seam allowance on the lining to make boning channels. And then I sewed the lining and the fashion fabric together. Now right here is where I made a mistake because I was putting sleeves on it, so it didn't really need to be flipped inside out here, so don't do that. Also, the neckline was bound with bias tape, so it really didn't need to be finished like that either. I cut and smoothed the edges of 1/4 inch plastic boning. It's not a corset, it's just a bodice, so plastic boning is fine. It just helps it keep the shape without offering any waist reduction. And then I ran out of plastic boning, so I had to use a giant zip tie for the back. Just checking the width here to make sure it was going to fit in the channel. When you're putting grommets in the back of a bodice, they need something to pull up against so it doesn't rip out of the fabric, so that's why there's a bone in the back. I didn't film the making of the sleeves, but I took the rest of the ruffle from the bottom hem of the skirt and made it into a ruffle for the bottom of the sleeves. And then I just did a generic sleeve shape. It's not a fitted sleeve, so it's fine. To bind the bottom edge, I traced around the bottom of the bodice and added seam allowance, although this didn't end up working terribly well and I had to redo it. It was too short, it needed to be a lot longer in the sides. I sewed it 2 inches down from the bottom edge, and I skipped over the plastic boning because you don't want to sew through that. I was gonna go back and hand stitch that part, but it didn't end up needing it. I did hand sew the back of the binding to the lining of the bodice though. Emmie is being a good assistant today by laying on top of what I'm trying to sew. Do you care to move? No. Basically, I did the same thing for the neckline. It was just a little bit smaller. Because it's not a corset, it's just a bodice, I used grommets instead of hand-sewn eyelets. But cutting holes in something you've worked hard on is very scary. It is not my favorite thing to do. I decided that I needed to make a petticoat, which is partially done, although I didn't film it because it was just the same method as it was the same method as the skirt. Hi, Emmie. Are you helping now? You being a good sewing assistant? Hello, so it is now December 11th, so it's been a week, I think. I've really been keeping track. And I have finished the whole dress, which I can't show you in one shot because my apartment is too small. But so far so good. All I have left is the cloak. This fabric is not thrifted. I did have to buy this because I was looking for something specific. But this was all thrifted. And I also made a white petticoat to go underneath just because every time I make a costume, I make a matching petticoat in that color, and then the next time I need a petticoat, I don't have one. So decided just to make a white one that can go with everything. And I made it out of an old bed sheet. So yay for thrifted. Onto the cloak. Okay, so I cut off about my height in the red fabric to make the bottom part of the cloak, and I'm just going to set it aside for now. So I have the rest of, I think it's about 1.5 yards of the red stuff to make the hood and the top part of the capelet out of. I have my pattern pieces here that I made with the drafted pattern from a flannel sheet that I had lying around. So I'm going to go ahead and cut those out and see how they start to look. So I have my pattern pieces cut out with some modifications that I just made notes to and didn't redo the mock-up for. So let's see how this goes. I sewed the pieces of the hood and the pieces of the capelet together with 1/2-inch seams. And then I hemmed them with a 1/2-inch seam. Also, I did this to the edges of the cape and the bottom of the cape. I stitched the fur as close as I could to the bottom edge without going over. Fake fur is not one of my favorite things to sew with. Also, everything is covered in red fluff. Because I also don't really like sewing. Hello. I don't really like sewing with crushed velvet, so yay. I stitched the top of the fur as well. I will note that I switched the top thread to be white while the bobbin is still red for this. I pinned the hood and the capelet parts together, and I had to use clips for the very thick parts with all the white fur. And stitch them together. Crushed velvet is stretchy, so for these parts I was using a narrow zigzag stitch. I gathered the top part of the bottom cloak together with embroidery floss, and I know it had to be 2 inches shorter, so it's pinned 2 inches above the seam allowance. I also added a thick ribbon to this to prevent stretching at the neckline. So the cloak is now done. It's all together. I can't really fit it in one shot, but I'm just going to sew a quick facing in just to make it a little bit neater around the neckline. It is now December 16th, and I have finished! Yes, Emmie. So I am a few days ahead of my December 20th goal, but I still have to do a video shoot tomorrow. It's supposed to snow, so I figured I'd take advantage of that. Oh yeah. Emmie thinks it's walk time. Is it walk time? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that it's actually supposed to snow tomorrow, so I can do the reveal part of the video. Yes. So the costume is done! It's December 18th now, so I did achieve my goal before the 20th. So I really liked the dress and how the dress came out. Not quite as excited about the cloak. It was just doomed from the start. I don't like working with crushed velvet or fake fur, but there's some design flaws, like the back of the cape is really heavy. So it's supposed to be like here, but if I let the cloak go, it just rides up. So I'm sure I could fix that if I wanted to. But we'll see. But the costume is done! So here are some shots that I took last night in the cold and the snow. We had a snowstorm. If you like my style of creativity, subscribe and follow along for more of my sewing adventures. I have 2 projects that I'm definitely going to do next year, and I have a couple of other ideas. But if you have any ideas for things you'd like to see me do, add it in the comments and let me know. So thanks for watching. Bye!